one of the sessions that we wanted to hold was an explicit conversation about being a black man, which one can take automatically as meaning there can't be one thing, because it would be like saying, well, being a woman, what is that? Being a man, what is that? All question marks. So this is going to be an opportunity for the four people on the panel, led by Akala, but himself contributing, to talk over that subject. So I just wanted to say that for those of you who weren't here this morning, that Akala is one of our most renowned historians, thinkers, philosophers, and artists. He's a hip-hop artist who started hip-hop Shakespeare. He travels all over the world, giving a sense of a renegotiated history that isn't the conventional one, which gives us a much wider understanding of how the world has been constructed. So can I welcome him to the stage with his fellow compatriots? Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. That was weak. How could you not? Were you not here this morning? Because I made this exact joke this morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, much better. We're going to jump right into it, and we will get to questions much earlier than we did in the debate this morning, so be ready to fire off. But I'll start with one. What if I take the title of this debate, and we'll start with Topher and go along. If I take the title, Being a Black Man, and rather than make it a statement, I make it a question. I put a question mark at the end. Being a Black Man, question mark. Where would you go from that?
Okay, well, I'm Topher Campbell. I'm here with my colleagues here. I was asked to prepare some thoughts around masculinity and blackness, and I'm also a writer, so I attempted to write something down which would stop me from sort of drifting off on lots of tangents. And this is kind of a bit of my little bit of provocation around this. So here we go. To be out, black, and gay. To be out, black and gay. To live as an out, black, gay man is a challenge. Because I appear conventional, mostly, most people assume I'm heterosexual. This is both a privilege and a problem. It's a privilege because, despite my self-identification, I have never experienced overt homophobia. It's a burden because, inevitably, I have to make the choice of coming out again and again and again. Sometimes it's too dangerous or too much like hard work. And at other times, it would be stupid not to. But in all cases, my masculinity, which is tied up with my erotic love for other men, is rendered invisible until I express it. This, then, only reinforces homophobia, the very homophobia that I hope to get around because I am an out, black, and gay man. To be out, black, and gay, then, is to be invisible. It means to be silent when at home, perhaps at 18 or 24, not wanting to alienate my loving family because racism renders me more vulnerable in the outside world without them. Or perhaps at 40, to not want to make a fuss as faculty head in a school when pupils call me names in front of the other staff, and then I'm accused of not being able to impose discipline. To be out, black and gay is impossible at work sometimes, unless I go through the intense scrutiny or curiosity and risk of homophobic remarks or the being passed over for promotion in the political game that requires me to be respectable with a respectable long-time partner, preferably white. In my church, mosque, family, if my church, mosque, or family reject me, or my friends, because I am gay, I will not get away from the risk of being stopped by police or called a racist slur or followed around a shop by a security guard or excluded from school because of my perceived aggression or labelled neat because of my poor background or labelled a sellout because of my educated accent. I don't get away from being black if I am gay, if I'm black and gay. To be out, black and gay doesn't protect me from the twin pillars of racism and homophobia. It doesn't shield me from people's expectations of me as a black man, that I typically represent a hard-edged masculinity, that I should be athletic, long-suffering in oppression, not very well educated, perhaps have even gone to prison, sexually prolific, smoke weed, be a baby father to many. To be out, black and gay doesn't shield me from the idea that I'm a mandingo top or a willing bottom, that I'm into fashion, love hanging with my girlfriends and girlfiends, that I have a little sugar in my walk and lightness in my voice, and I'm also funny and outrageous, that Beyonce or Gaga are my idols, that I really want to get married and adopt children, that I'm oh so brave for being out, black and gay. As a black man, it's okay for me to shank a guy in broad daylight. Killing a brother is praised, perhaps among some communities, by other brothers. But kissing another brother tenderly in public definitely is not. That my desire and love for other black men should be frowned upon when so much violence is done to us and by us, to each other, is bewildering. This is why black men loving black men is the revolutionary act. To love my father, brother, son, friend is as important to me as making love to my male lover. To think one kind of love is natural and another is not is like making a division in the sky that doesn't exist. Excuse my British accent. You niggers is soldiers, man, fucking toy soldiers. Yeah, get in line, cadet. Attend hut. Yo-yo, you punk-ass bitch. I know you can't wait to get off house arrest, nigger, so you can run the fuck out of New York, you faggot. Spin the lyrics of the game, in playing the game, echoed by 50, Eminem, Nas, Lil Wayne, and all those fine, beautiful brothers who so desperately need to define their sexuality by denigrating mine, alongside the relishing use of Burn, Battyman Burn by ragga stars soaking in the sun of some of the poorest countries in the world, as if the thought of two men fucking each other, loving each other, is more offensive than the poverty and exploitation all around them. To be out, black and gay, will find no refuge also in the clubs of London, where chunky white guys full of meth and Tina and G hunt around ready to fill their subconscious and not so subconscious desires for a bit of big black cock. The pithy phrase whispered in my ear when I was younger, many years ago as a teenager, barely coming out as black and gay. To be out black and gay is truly stressful sometimes, nearly impossible. But to be truly liberated, to be free and to be self-determined, to be a man of my choosing, whether I wish to swish or strut, whether I have swag or geek chic, whether I'm gentle or rough, or none of the above. I have to be out black and gay, not silenced, otherwise I will forever be enslaved to another man's idea of what it is to be black and what it is to be gay. Thank you.
So you do that, and then you both look at me and say, top that. I can't top that. Okay, my name's Shane Ryan. I'm the Chief Executive of Working with Men, which is a charity that supports positive male activity, engagement, and involvement. Look us up online. I was backstage realizing that you're about to do that, and just thinking about being a black guy. And I went back to last year, I was asked to be involved in this thing called Be Part of the Story. And I had to tell a story of my earliest kind of memories of being black. And I thought back, and I thought, well, when did I realize that there was such a big difference? Or when did I realize that racism existed? And I remember going to school. I lived in Fulham, and I remember going to school one day. And throughout my time in primary school, I've been waiting to get into secondary school and wear a school blazer. I don't know if anyone else did, but this blazer was a big thing to me. So, and my parents didn't have very much money, but they got me a blazer. I was going to school, so I was walking down the Fulham Palace Road. I was so happy, proud of my blazer. It's early in the morning, and these guys in a white van came past and chucked the entire contents of their ashtray and all this coffee and stuff out onto my blazer, shouted "coon," and carried on driving. And I just stood there in the middle of the street and couldn't work out what had just happened to me. And then, to add insult to injury, I got to school and they gave me a detention for my blazer. And I just thought, is this how it's going to be? And then, I suppose the only other thing I think of is, after that, I spoke to my mum about it. And she was just saying that as a black young man, you were going to have to be twice as good to get half as far. And my heart sunk. And I just thought, am I going to have to wear that for the rest of my life? Is that, in everything I do, am I going to have to try and be twice as good to get half as much? And then, as I got a bit older, I always remembered that statement. I looked around and I saw other young black men that I knew that were really trying to get on, really trying to do things. And I understood sometimes why they fell by the wayside and didn't quite, kind of fell short of the mark for themselves. It was that feeling that no matter what we did, it wasn't quite going to be good enough. And that maybe we had to find another way to be black young men, you know. So which is why you see individuals who adopt. I don't know if you're familiar with the term cool pose, which is there's a book by I think it's by Majors and Bilson, and they talk about how as black men, what we do is we adopt being cool as an alternative to some of the other bits and pieces that are out there for white young men in our society. And so it made me really, really think about that kind of stuff. And so they're the thoughts I bring today. They're not as interesting, I don't think, as what you've just said, or as thought-provoking as what you've just said. But nevertheless, and that's why I'm here today, I think. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ekow Eshun. I'm a writer, broadcaster. I do a few different things. It's been really good hearing those last couple of talks. And I just kind of build on that with a couple of reflections, really, which is just that, to come back to the last point, which is my question. I'd answer Akala's question about being a black man, question mark, with another question, which is, when do you become black? And as we've heard, most of the time, I think, for most of us, that's not a question that you turn over as a child. It's an answer that's visited upon you at some point, often in uncomfortable circumstances, often when you're young and unprepared for that. And it sets your life on a really interesting trajectory, I think, because from that point onwards, you're kind of on the back foot, in as much as what you realize from a very early age, sometimes at 5, 6, or whatever, is that the version of you that others see isn't you, if that makes sense. That other people see you, determine you, have expectations and prejudices and whole sets of understanding about who you are before you've even opened your mouth, before you've even walked through the door. There's what it kind of boils down to, I think, is a very simple thing, which is that black men, black people, but especially black men, I'd say, are visible and invisible at the same time. They're highly visible because you can walk down the street and people can decide before you've opened your mouth who you are, what you're about, based on sometimes what you wear, but chiefly based on their own prejudices and so on. And you're completely invisible at the same time because the things that aren't talked about, forums like this aren't very common. So what's inside you doesn't get heard, doesn't get seen in terms of kind of pressures or kind of expectations or ideas or ideals or ambitions or hopes you might have or just have might stored up. So you're kind of you're an object rather than a subject most of the time. You're a thing that's seen, but you're not heard. And it becomes very difficult to express who you are. And under those circumstances, what tends to happen is that it's very easy to fall into kind of prescribed notions of what you should be as a black man. So, when I was younger, it feels quite a long time ago now, but when I was younger, there was an awful lot of talk, especially through hip-hop, about keeping it real, about being authentic, about being true. And actually, all of this was a lie, really, because, those kind of ideas about being kind of cool, about being distanced, about being masculine, about being detached, about being emotionless, about being cool. All of those are really a trap for men. They're a trap because they don't allow you to do the thing that's most important to you, which is to go on a journey to discover who you truly are. You can get caught up in essentially all you end up doing is replaying other people's expectations of who you should be. And the real journey, the real task of being a black man, I think, is to set off on this path into yourself and to try and find the ways to understand, without cliche, without realness, to try and understand who you really are, to get beyond tropes of authenticity and to get somewhere that's subjective, that's idiosyncratic, that's very particular to you. My heroes tend to be those kind of slightly more kind of idiosyncratic, kind of dandyish figures, your Andre 3000s. and people who don't make sense, the people who don't necessarily fit into a single category. Because what I admire about someone like him, what I admire about someone like Prince, is simply this thing that they seem to be themselves. And for me, that's the biggest challenge, that's the biggest task, but it's also the key reward. It's the place you need to be in. It's not really a journey that stops. It gets visited upon you very early on, but from then, the response and the possibility, I think we have, the possibility that we have when people aggressively decide to say, you're this, is to say, actually, no, I'm not that. I'm me. I'm not necessarily sure how that articulates, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find out what that means. I'm going to surprise myself. I'm going to confound expectation from others in order so that I can live a life that's free. I can live a life of articulation and honesty and artistry and openness. And I think we can't do anything but that, because that's how we get to solidarity with each other, that's how we get to connection with ourselves, that's how we get to determine the world on our own terms. I think how we do that is down to each one of us, but I think that's the first task, and that's what, for me, that's what is involved in being a man, being a black man.
Well, I'll give my response to that question, then we'll probably just open straight to you guys, to be honest. But for me, of course, the situation is slightly different in a sense, which is only something I've really to dialogue about myself with really over the last 5 or 10 years, in that I might self-identify, and I do self-identify as a black man. I identify with my African heritage, but my mother is white. And it's interesting because I discovered my mum was white at the exact same time I discovered that I was black, on the same day. And I remember it very vividly. My mum's actually here somewhere, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? It was the day I went to school. Now, I went to school in Camden, so we're not talking about, outer Shropshire. It was a multicultural school. It was the day I went to school, and the boy who lived on my street called me a Chinese black nigger bastard, which, to be fair to him, was pretty original, right? I'd never heard that one before. But that when you think about it, that reflected the irony of me being mixed. I didn't realize it at the time. I felt black, and until very recently, I've affirmed blackness as I've got older. While I'm unapologetically a Pan-Africanist, while I unapologetically teach African history and lean towards that side of my culture in a certain way, I also think it's important to understand my mixedness, mostly out of respect for people that have 2 black parents. The reason why I say that is because those of us who are of lighter skin, who are mixed, are deliberately given privilege over people who are darker than us, and they have to deal with racism and white supremacy, certainly in a way that I do not. When people imagine a depraved, insane, ragged black man, they're not talking about someone who looks like me, they're talking about someone who looks like Wesley Snipes or Digimon Hunsu. And there is certainly a fear attached to men that look like that isn't in the exact same way attached to me. I'm not saying that there isn't racism towards those of us who are light skinned. And I'm not even saying that the relative privilege is really privilege. It's a privilege based on denial of who you are and based on looking down on part of what you are, which to me is disgusting. It's not privilege. But many light-skinned people have accessed and behaved and even committed genocide upon that privilege, if we talk about, say, the history of the Dominican Republic in relation to Haiti, for example. And so for me, that day began a journey that has really defined me and defined my life. And I was very lucky, unlike many people from mixed... See, we talk about black relationships breaking down. What we never talk about is why mixed race relationships never last. Like, way more than 2 black parents are far more likely to stay together than 1 black person and 1 white person. We never ask why that is. I didn't grow up with my dad. As most young mixed children don't. We don't ask why. What is that? Are black and white people getting into relationships because they love each other? When we look at the overwhelming majority of it is black men and white women, what is that dynamic? Why? What's going on here? Is it simply love, or is there some other psychological issue playing into why these relationships are formed in the first place and why they consequently don't last in a racialized society such as this one? I was lucky because my mum, to be fair to her, was around a particular set of black people that she'll tell you herself were very welcoming of her. That's not to say she never suffered any prejudices or whatever else, or that people, because what racism does is makes black people actually ironically feel they always have to facilitate white people and make white people feel comfortable. When black people don't do that, it's often felt of when a white person goes into a black space, if we don't lay out the red carpet, it feels like persecution. What white people don't realize is we're far more horrible to one another than we ever are to anybody white. But this is reality. So for my mum being in those spaces, the irony is while other people that looked like her were spitting at her and calling her a nigger lover and kicking her and chasing her in the street, it wasn't like today where having a mixed race kid is fashionable. I was born in 1983. It wasn't so fashionable. Particularly my godfather's family took her in and educated her, and so she came to understand that she had black children, whether she liked it or not. She didn't have mixed race children. Being half white was not going to stop the police searching me for the first time when I was 11. Does that make sense? And so my mum was able to make decisions that gave me equipment that I don't believe most mixed children have. And again, we don't talk about why. Why are the mixed kids always the craziest kids on the estate? No one ever asks why. Right? We always talk about the black kids, but the craziest kid on the estate is always the little mixed race youth. Because he goes home to his white mum, usually, and tries to explain what he's experiencing as a black man, and he doesn't even know he's a black man. One of my best friends was like this when we was young, who swore he'd be dead by 21, and he was dead by 21. But his argument in life, right, and his behavior in life was as a mixed boy, his black masculinity was defined by how tough he was, right? So if he was going to be tough, he had to be tougher. Being half white, he had to be tougher than all of the black boys, right? Another boy we knew growing up used to deny that. His dad was black. His dad was white. Point blank. If you told him his dad was white, he'd punch you in the face, right? And his dad was white. His white dad was actually at home. But he lived on a predominantly black estate where that wasn't what it was. And he went on to be a bad boy, right? Partly because of that. So my mum's knowledge and the knowledge she was given and she was part of meant that I was enrolled in Pan-African Saturday School, that I studied certain things, but that put me in direct opposition to, being frank with you, white teachers my entire life in school. And if I were to tell you what my experiences were in school, all of the black people in the audience would say, yeah, sounds about right. Most white people would say, you're actually lying. Not because people are being bad, but because it sounds so ridiculous. It would take for my white mum to tell you the stories and you'd be like, no. In the 1980s in Camden, in the 1990s, a teacher said to you in a historical debate, this is just to give you one example of the most ridiculousness that I experienced in school, and then we will just open it straight up, but just to reflect on it. We were having a debate, and this is the most extreme example I can give you, and it defined my teenage years as well. We were having a debate with my history teacher who'd been repeatedly, generally racist and the kind of person she was. And it wasn't the first time I'd experienced this kind of teacher. It was a constant thing because my knowledge of African history constantly put me in opposition. When I was told the theorem of Pythagoras was the theorem of Pythagoras, I knew it was on an Egyptian papyrus reed 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born. So I'm going to ask, why are you telling me it's the theorem of Pythagoras? It's not, right? I'm going to ask that question. So she was saying that the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan are exactly the same thing, except one's black and one's white. I said, miss, that's a little bending the truth, right? I mean, whatever you perceive, or whatever the Nation of Islam's beliefs are or were in relation to white people, we have to look at the time in which they came into existence. They came into existence at a time when to be black was to be legally non-human in America, So they didn't come into existence in the way the Klan did. They don't go around routinely hanging white men from trees and chopping their penises off and burning them in public. But they also do some very positive things that you can't deny, like cleaning up drug addicts and policing crime in certain African-American inner cities. Her response was to say that the Ku Klux Klan also stopped crime by killing black people. I shit you not. Ask my mum, she sat right there. I wrote to the governors of the school, but this is where the racism came in. I wrote to the governors of the school, an articulate letter. I was always good at English. And the headmaster called me into his office. And he gave me a real lesson in polite, liberal fuck you-ism. It was amazing. The way he patronized me and gave me a book about Martin Luther King. I shit you not, I've got the book on my shelf. I'm not even saying it to be sarcastic. He actually gave me a book called The Children, about the civil rights struggle, and attempted to placate me. And basically for a year or so, as I continued to complain about what this teacher said and suggest there should be disciplinary action, they moved me form class. She was also my form tutor. They moved me form class and it got brushed on the carpet and she got a promotion. Hooray. Let's open up for questions. Unless there's anything quickly you want to add, I'll give everyone 30 seconds to come back. Okay, let's open straight up. Do we have the roving mics around? Let's go here, here, here. We'll take 3, and then we'll move on. We'll take those 3, and then we'll come to others. So we'll take 3 at once, and then anyone who feels to respond, respond in due course to any one of the 3 that go out.
Good. So first of all, I just want to thank the panel. Fantastic discussion. Now, it's very important to note that the question I'm going to ask is rather loaded. So do let me put some context into it. And do bear in mind, I'm approaching this from a very conceptual perspective and equally from the macro. So there's an awful lot of assumptions here. But this idea of what is to be a black man, I feel is truly broken, and irretrievably so. That's not our fault. A lot of that is post-slavery, the prison industrial complex, and the representation of black men in the media. But what we need to recognize, that's a given. And there's many things that are not in our control because we're not part of the ruling class. Now, if we understand that the idea of what is to be a black man today is broken, the question is, moving forward as black men, do we give up that idea of identity? Now, it's a very strong notion to say, I'm no longer black, because ultimately this subculture hasn't served me a purpose in the last 10, 20 years. Now being black served an awful big sort of part of our history and gaining civil rights. But for my lifetime, and bear in mind I'm 26, so there's a naive view on it, being black has never been beneficial to me. And the attachment to what is perceived as being black has never been beneficial. And I've often had to forego that. Now, in order for us to move forward, I feel that we have to recognize this is not our game that we're playing. We're actually playing a ruling class game, which is a bourgeois game. And let's be frank, while it's not a game played by all white people, it is played by the ruling class, and that is representation of the 1%, again, not us. So the question is, do we forgo what is black and fully assimilate into the ruling class bourgeois ideals in order to progress forward?
Okay, that's one. Well, we're going to take three at once, and then people are going to respond in due course. If you're on that side, you may as well take this one. Oh, there's one over here as well, please. Yeah, we'll take this one first.
So my question is to you specifically. I'm mixed. My mom is white, my dad is black. I was born in Brazil, but I was raised in Portugal, Spain. And my experience is I never realized I was mixed until I moved to the UK and in the US. There was this thing, I got this white girlfriend, and she told me, yeah, you mixed. I was like, what's that? I'm black. My skin is brown. No, you mixed. Your mom is white, so you mixed. And I think this ignorance that I've had throughout my whole life kind of helped me, because going through the educational system in Portugal, in Spain, in very homogeneous societies, Catholic, I was always, the darker kid in my class. But I never this ignorance that I'm actually mixed. And I think it kind of helped me because I don't have some of those hang-ups. And my question to you is that don't we put a lot of importance in making this distinction between black and mixed, and I think it works as a hindrance to people like us to think too much, to make that distinction, basically.
This actually leads on to what this guy was saying here earlier. I'm glad that you touched on the issue of light skin and dark skin and brown and people segregating each other on the race, on their hues. And since you were sharing your story about how you realized when you were black, when I went to school, there was a mentoring project for black girls, and they said, all the black girls stay behind in the class, we've got a project for you. So I stayed back behind, and one of the girls, a Caribbean girl, said, what are you doing here? You're not black. And I was like, what are you talking about? I am black. She goes, nah, you're Indian. I said, I'm not Indian. You're Somali then. I'm not from Somalia. I'm from Eritrea. She goes, same thing, you're from Somalia. And I thought to myself, hold on, I'm brown. I see myself as an African, but I've got another black person telling me that I'm not of African descent, or I'm not a black person. So it made me curious to see about the development of black people or people of African Caribbean descent. Are we ever going to move away from this black skin, light skin business, dark skin, light skin debate? Because we're just going backwards. Every time we feel like we're going forward, we see things on social media stereotyping people, and it makes us feel a bit like, how are we going to move forward? And recently Madonna put up an Instagram picture of her son, and she put, this nigger, and it opened up a debate about, how we label ourselves and how we expect others to talk to us, without realizing how we talk to each other first. So just to thank you for saying that.
Thank you. So we've got the three. We've got the idea of black identity and should we abandon it. We've got a specific question about being mixed. And your question is about light skin, dark skin, privilege, and black self-relations. Would that be fair? Does anyone want to respond to the first one about should we abandon this idea of being black?
I will, yeah. Well, it's an interesting idea. I mean, well, I wouldn't say we have a choice in and abandoning that, because again, as we've been talking so far, those ideas about being black aren't necessarily voluntary things. They're visited upon you in different ways. But, I mean, the simple answer is no, because, there's one of the most significant writers about race and kind of philosophies of race, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was kind of writing at the turn of the last century in 1910, 1920s, wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folk. And in The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois coined what I think is a very useful term called double consciousness, which is exactly this thing about the fact that if you're black, you have one view of the world, which is your view, but you also understand that you're being seen and understood by a kind of white gaze around you. So you have a kind of double way of looking at the world. Du Bois saw this as a kind of burden, as a kind of sort of burden that black people had to carry. In fact, I tend to look at it another way, which is to say, if you can see the world two ways, that allows you to have a kind of perception and an insight into who we are, into how the world organizes itself and runs, that other people, white people, don't have. So to kind of turn over Akala's story, that story in one way is about disempowerment, prejudice and so on, but it's also a story about power. It's also a story about your own personal power, your own personal relationship to exactly what's going on around you, and the insight that you take away from that, and that stays with you all of your life, which is an understanding of those larger power relationships, an understanding of your own position in there, and an insight, at least a glimpse then, into how you deal with that. So most of our lives as black people are about a negotiation between these different sets of spaces. Sometimes that puts you in a very difficult position, but I would absolutely say that the insight you gain from that is key. It's key because it allows you at least the choice and the option and the opportunity to think about how you relate to other people, about how you talk to other people, think about how you can negotiate these very troubled spaces. I think it gives you power. So I don't think it's about abandoning being black at all. I think it's about using that to understand your own position, to form connections with other people, and to try and move forward on terms that are yours.
I'll just add something really quickly. I think the two things. First and foremost, I mean, in terms of the question, when you say, should we abandon, I'm not sure who you mean by we. So that needs qualifying for me, because I don't know what the we is. Okay. And I think, well, see, even there it becomes difficult, because then the notion of what a black man is, then you get into that whole thing. We do that a lot. People do that a lot, the whole we thing, and I'm not sure who we is to start with, but that's a completely different debate that we won't go into right now. The other thing is that I'm sad, I suppose, in a sense that you say that the connotations of being black have been negative for you, and that makes me quite sad, really, because I think that through some of my more difficult moments, I have looked to black, to use that term again, black people of the past, in order to look at what I was going to do in the future. So the struggles that people have had in the past, and the fact that they've overcome those struggles, have really given me insight into how I was going to live my own life. And if you took that away from me, it would have made my life a lot more difficult. So that's a key thing for me. So I'm quite sad that you haven't found any of that. You haven't in the annals of history, you haven't found individuals that inspire you and encourage you to do better things and to move your life forward. So I'm sad about that. But I suppose I'm answering the question really in that sense, and I'm saying no. So I don't think on that level that we would do that. Sorry.
No. I mean, it's kind of it's great. I love the provocation. It's fantastic. It's like a circle's a circle, and how can it be a square and all kind of things? How can it not? How can something be something that it is not? I mean, Jimmy Baldwin, famously said to the interviewer who asked him, I think it might have been David Frost, but I'm not quite sure, what's it like, said this interviewer, being born poor, black, and gay in the South? And Jimmy replied famously, well, David, honey, I guess I hit the jackpot. I mean, it's basically, we are peoples have been oppressed over centuries, but you look at the traditions that have come out of that, whether it be mass in the Caribbean, whether it be the dances that come out of Europe, you look at great people, musicians like Fela Kuti, you look at great thinkers like Garvey, you look at so much rich history and culture, despite the oppression and racism and all that kind of structural and international legal and civil forces that have been striven to silence us, we're still pretty much getting to the place where we need to be. I think individually as a man, being black is something I cherish, really. And I stand on the shoulder of giants of many hues, very light-skinned and very dark-skinned, very mixed heritage like I am. My mother is half Asian, my father was African-American. It's a great privilege to be sitting in this situation at this time in life, and I think it's a great thing. So I think that's all I can say, really. I mean, there's no abandoning, really, because in a sense, you look across the world, diasporically speaking, we live in the UK at the moment, we're living in London, but when you go international, you're not looking at a white world. You're looking at a very different kind of perspective. Or just take yourself out of London, out of Europe, and you're looking at a world from a very different kind of place. This isn't the center of gravity here, and it isn't the center of history either. So there's kind of lots of different ways of seeing, and I think we should be aware of those because they're empowering us.
Sorry, before you say anything else, sorry, can I just...
Sorry, brother, I don't want to spend too much time on this one point, so I'm going to have to come back to you on that one if I'm honest.
Like a personal vindication, so I felt I had to do some sort of rebuttal on it, which I do have a beautiful one.
It wasn't meant that way. It wasn't meant. It was sadness. It wasn't an attack.
I think the last sentiment is reality is sad. And the idea is that I use the term capitalist society because the world is governed by that idea. Now, as we stand in England, the ruling class are one thing, but the ruling class have many manifestations of themselves everywhere. The game is the same, the rule is the same. How we play it is because of what Du Bois said, the double consciousness. Those that play it well, again, abandon the idea of black identity, in my opinion. So we can get in another time.
Let's talk. Let me respond. Let me respond briefly, and then we'll take 3 more questions. Firstly, I think we have to know history. If we know history, we know that the idea that black people only discovered their blackness the moment white people turned up is nonsense. If we read some ancient African philosophy from the Mandingo Kingdom, from ancient Kemet, from Nubia, black people had sufficient intelligence to realize they were black because of their relationship to the sun, and they worshipped the sun, they understood what their melanin was, etc., etc., etc. So we didn't suddenly discover blackness the moment racism showed up, and that's very important to understand. Okay? There was a particular pride put into blackness, and in fact, the ancient Nubians, for example, one of their big conflicts with ancient Egypt was that ancient Egypt was mixing. They was like, no, we're not unmixing, we're keeping our blackness, and that was part of the interaction between those two societies. Coming to the point about being mixed, do I think we place too much distinction on the gradations of blackness? I think it depends on our motivation. If our motivation for looking at what mine and your experience has been in relation to my dad's experience, my dad's 6'2", he's 15.5 stone, he's got dreadlocks, and he's jet black. For me to pretend that I'm perceived in exactly the same manner as my father is, I think from a revolutionary perspective is dishonest. And I have to look at the way people that look just like me and you have thought it perfectly acceptable, whether in Libya just last year, sponsored by NATO, to hack dark-skinned black people to death, or in Haiti in the 1930s, right? So this racism that has turned into the same kind of violent racism that the open white supremacists express, people that look like me and you have picked up that baton and run with it. Whether we're talking about in transatlantic slavery, where people were given a certain amount of privilege, or whether we're talking about today in North Africa, or today in fact, black Haitians, black Dominican Republic citizens from Haiti have just recently had their citizenship revoked, for example, which speaks back to this division between mulatto and black. So I think from a revolutionary perspective, it's dishonest. If our motivation for looking at gradations of blackness is about dividing black people and playing one-upmanism and saying, well, I'm more black than you because I'm 2 shades darker, or I'm more black than you because, I've read 5 more books, is all this kind of nonsense that is really about breeding conflict, then that's where it's problematic for me. Whereas if we are looking at our different experiences, Africans born in Africa have a different experience. If you live in Nigeria, your primary oppression, or at least your visible oppression, might be a black government. It might not be racism, or at least the structural racism from afar, IMF, World Bank, etc. I can't talk to the average person living in Lagos about that because visibly, what can they see? Arsehole black police. If I go to Jamaica, what can they see right in front of them? Black police officers that shoot pregnant women. Do you understand? So there's got to be gradations of discussion. Lastly, on that point, I think it's insane that even light-skinned black people from the Western Hemisphere think they can tell East Africans that they're not black. I've never been able to figure that one out. Maybe someone can shed some light on it, but it's obviously insanity. Especially what's most interesting is people are claiming the heritage of ancient Ethiopia, ancient Nubia, ancient Egypt, and at the same time telling people from Somalia and Eritrea and Ethiopia that they're not black. This is the level of stupidity. Any quick rebuttals to those three, or are we going to go?
I just would say that divide and rule, that's just classic divide and rule stuff, and people feeding into that divide and rule, so, and we've seen that, with more by way of migration, people just think, well, I've been here longer, so I have some kind of different right to the right that you have, and it's just nonsense, as you say.
Absolutely. Can we take 3 more questions, please? We'll take 2, both the 2 sat next to each other at the front. In fact, we'll take 4, and then 2 just here. And then we will come to you as well, but we'll take those 4 quickly.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I may get the thumbs up or the thumbs down, but I don't give a damn because my skin is black, okay? My skin is black. And I think what has happened here with history, education, whatever you want to call it, they have twisted it. Our skin is black because we were born in the sunshine. But the mind, the heart, the soul, come on. That's completely different. Each one of us, whatever color of our skin, we have that same sort of mind, heart, soul. The blood is red. So when we come with this and black that, and we just get so kapooled into those sort of way with our talk, we get labelized. We feel submissive that we cannot do things because we are black. But if you got a mind and a heart and soul to do what you want, with your attitude, with whatever comes your way, you can do it with that mind. And that's what I call my black skin is black. Thank you, and that's the fact.
Can we have one here? By the way, yeah, statements are fine as well. It doesn't always happen. No, I wasn't even saying... No, listen, I'm not saying that to be facetious. I'm being genuine. It doesn't have to be a question to the panel of experts on blackness. Their statements are absolutely fine also.
Ready? I would just like to bring us back to Akala. You said you had a question about the success rate of mixed-race couples. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered if the panel would like to give their thoughts on that.
Cool. Yep, absolutely. And then we've got 2 just here. Yep.
This is one observation plus perception from my own experience. I have the sense that you're talking much more about, in relation to being a black man, what it is to be black more than what it is to be a man, which I found very interesting. Secondly, for me, you might have noticed I'm white, but my mother was Jewish, my father came from a Huguenot background. I think of myself as mixed, though I'm mixed white. My take on it is that I have a richness and a loneliness. I have a richness, I have a foot in a number of different camps, but I have a loneliness in that I'm not completely part of either.
I really enjoyed your poem, and I was just wondering where you can get a copy of it, and what do you mean by the line "violence done to us and by us"? And there's a second point. I was very bemused by the verdict of the coroner on the Duggan case. Unfortunately, I forget his first name. The jury found that he wasn't carrying a gun, but that the two constables acted on the basis of honest belief. That would indicate that they made a mistake, according to the coroner. And I don't know the answer to this, but you would think in those circumstances it would be appropriate for the chief of the Met to issue an apology, even though those two officers had acted lawfully.
Cool. So should we go for either the success rate of mixed couples, but there was also a question specifically for you, Topher, about the poem.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I wrote it this morning. It's not a, but the thing around violence done to us, well, I mean, it's like, the reason why I try to use such a tight phrase is because it kind of, you explode it, it's huge. The violence done to us, whether it could be the transatlantic slave trade or to individuals, whether they're stopped by the police at 11 for the first time, or whether it's the first moment you discover from another point of view that you're a certain kind of black. I could go on. And bias, well, you know, I mean, the young men in our country, young black men, are incarcerated for lots of different reasons, and one of the reasons is because of the violence they do to each other. Same with the United States, same within a country where my mum comes from, Jamaica, where has some of the higher killing rate in Nicaragua. You know, so that's what I was alluding to. But also the psychological violence that we do in terms of hating in relation to the kind of homophobia that happens within black communities. Not that black people are any more homophobic than anybody else, but you know, the Catholic Church, for example, gives you an example of the way that perhaps Catholicism thinks about sexuality, or you can talk about Islam, you can talk about Buddhism in Malaysia. So I just want to make that point. But so it's also about, you know, the fact that we throw our young sons and some daughters out of our house if we find a gay or lesbian. We're still beating up kids on the street of London if they're gay or lesbian. So there's those kinds of violences, really.
Cool. I'll pick up on the point about mixed couples because I have some experience of it. Obviously, being born into that. I think the point I was trying to allude to is that I think there are behaviors, taboo behaviors, which is actually what my lecture tomorrow is about. It's about sex and race. But there are certain taboo behaviors that we don't like to talk about. You know, if you go to Jamaica, if you go to Salvador de Bahia, which I've done many times, if you go to Gambia, you will see, which is a phenomenon you don't see many places in the world, you see male prostitution. You will see scores and scores and scores and reams of middle-aged white Western women go into these parts of the world to pay to sleep with black men. They're not going to Poland. They're not going to Thailand, like white men go to Thailand. I've just come back from Thailand yesterday. There in Cambodia and Laos are prostitution capitals for Western men. But what is it psychologically in the minds of white Western women that when they seek male prostitution, they go to these overwhelmingly black spaces? It's an uncomfortable conversation for everybody, for white men, for white women, for black people. But then what is it about black men that makes them, in Western countries at least, desire white women so much, or at least choose to create mixed relationships? And I think that's not me saying that there isn't genuine love between some people that are black and some people that are white. What I'm saying is I don't think everyone's relationship decisions, if black men hate one another, many of whom publicly declare that they do, when a rapper says, I will kill that nigger, he's making it very clear he hates black people. I never used to see it that way, but it's clear. How I know this is when I go into prisons and young boys write these kind of lyrics and I say to them, well, my mum's white, my dad's black. If I write songs saying I'm going to go out and kill honkies and crackers and whitey tomorrow, what do you think about that? Without exception, every single black boy I've said that to said, no, you can't do that, that's racist. The same boy who 2 minutes ago just said I'm going to blow a nigger's head off when I see him has told me he values white life infinitely more than he values black life. See, because we tend to think that you have to be white to be a white supremacist. That's ridiculous. Some of the worst white supremacists I know are black. That's the only good thing I found about the Django film was Samuel Jackson's character, right? That Uncle Ruckus character is real. There are black people that hate blackness. Now, if that exists, their relationships with white people can never be genuine because it's not two people who respect one another's background and culture coming together. It's one superior, one inferior. And I think at some point, the relationship between white privilege, white supremacy, and black inferiority and mixed relationships makes many of them untenable. It takes a very strong love and a very genuine set of mutual respect to maintain that kind of relationship, in my opinion, if you're conscious of yourself. Lots of black people can be dishonest with themselves and act like that stuff doesn't exist, as can white people. But I don't think that's a genuinely honest, fulfilling relationship when you have to dismiss people's baggage and identity. Yeah, and the last point about Mark Duggan, is, let's be clear, even when there's been verdicts of unlawful killing, when black people have died in police custody in this country, so when police have definitely not acted lawfully, so when they put 35 or 60 feet of tape around the mouth of Joy Gardner, whose mother I met last night, and they killed her, and the jury found unlawful killing, police officers didn't go to prison. When they unlawfully killed Roger Sylvester or Marlon Downs, names that many people don't know in this room, but should know, police officers didn't go to jail. When the Broadwater Farm riots in 1985, people know P.C. Blakelock's name, they don't know Cynthia Jarrett's name. The riots in Brixton in the 80s also caused by the police shooting Sherry Gross, again, someone's grandmother in the back. The idea that the police only kill black gangsters just doesn't stand up to, and even that it would be legitimate even if the person was a gangster. There's a thing called due process, right? And we're saying that pedophiles are entitled to due process, but certain young black men are not. That is the narrative, right? Police officers killed a dog. They locked a car in 2011 or 10, I believe it was. Does anyone remember this case? It was in the news. The Metropolitan Police apologized. Let's be clear about that, the significance of what I'm saying. A dog was locked in a car on a hot summer's day and the dog died. The police officers came out and apologized. I'll let you marinate on that. Can we take 1, 2, 3, 4? We'll come to the middle as well. So, just because it's easier, we can do 2 at the bottom and 2 at the top.
So I work with primarily young men from disadvantaged backgrounds in your home borough, actually, in Camden. Mm-hmm. And kind of some of the things that I see kind of represented day in, day out are kind of the things that you've been talking about on the panel there. The sense that, you know, as a black man, I'll have to work twice as hard in order to get so far, and kind of various other neuroses which their experiences seem to have kind of embedded within them. Kind of got a successful panel set up there, and I guess I'm very interested to know, when presented with all of these, what were the strengths, the things that you needed to keep you kind of strong on your path in order to build a successful future? Because quite obviously there's a bit of a lottery going on at the moment, where some people are exposed to this and make it and some people don't. So I'd be interested to hear kind of what is it that can build forward, and things that, you know, actual real human beings kind of in this room can put in place, and not, you know, I don't really have any
I'm going to have to
interest
push
in
you
hearing the
directly
media.
to the question, brother. I'm getting a 5-minute cue. So from going forward, all questions, 20 seconds, all statements, 20 seconds or no more. Same with responses, if we can be concise. Try and get as many of you seen as possible. Okay, what is the question?
Just yeah, what strengths do we need for our black men to draw on, excluding the media?
Okay. Yeah. What are the key factors, key strengths? That's 1, 2 up here. Have you got a mic?
Yeah, just pick up a point that was said earlier, if that was made, that black men have insight into how power and patriarchy works. Would they not then have a key role in challenging patriarchy?
Great question. There was 2 more on this side.
My question is on perception, particularly with, I'd say, young black men today, in the view which is sold to them about what they should be and how they should behave. In particular, what would you say as a panel should we try to, in terms of changing media and changing perception, so people can be themselves despite, you know, their skin tone, not defining the cool, not defining by the music, not defined by what they should be into and things they should do.
Cool. 1 more on this side, and then respond to anyone you wish.
I'll be quick. Mine is about black men and masculinity, and how for them to celebrate, it seems there's a shadow that's been there for a long time, how they've been stigmatized in this country from decades of criminals, or, you know, oversexed. That shadow is always there. It's always there. If they did something slightly wrong, that kind of shadow seems to take over. Or young black men who are innocent and they're always portrayed, there's always a underline saying he was no angel, and that was the case of Mark Duggan, he was no angel. I mean, how are we going to deal with this kind of stigma, this shadow that's been there for decades? It hasn't gone away.
Cool. Any particular one of those? Anyone wants to respond?
I'll jump in and just say, first of all, let's make no mistake. It's difficult out there for young black men. In 2000, I'll try and be really, really quick. In 2011, after the disturbances, we conducted a piece of research. We spoke to 400 young men. Now, we were expecting to get all kinds of different stuff out of this study. What was most notable out of the study was the two things that particularly black young men were most scared of was, one, the police, and I think the Duggan incident tells you why, and the other thing was black young men, okay? That was when they leave their house in the morning, they're worried about other guys. If you live in a city, you are more likely, people think that, well, for instance, that women are the biggest victims of violent crime. No, in the capital, the biggest victims of violent crime are young men, okay? If you're a young man, you're more likely to do, sorry.
That's right.
Time. Right, so that's a major issue. So I think that to answer your question there about young men and about the issues for young men, a lot of that is compounded over generations. It's a very, very difficult situation, not one we can unpick in 30 seconds. I'm going to move straight away to just talking about what you were saying.
What's the
there.
X factor?
Yeah, just, I'm going to say it. People won't like it, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to tell you exactly what my uncle told me when I was about 10 years old, and just remember this. If you're not going to go out there and do something constructive for yourself, nobody cares. One way or another, no one cares. So if you don't care about yourself, nobody's going to care about you. And if you go forward with that idea, then everything kind of fits into place. Well, it has for me. Cool. Just say that. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no... I think the route map for young black gay men is near invisible. I think some of those men who are looking into professions are also black gay men. And they may be going to different projects and different ideas, and some of them may have to be closeted in those projects. So there's even deeper prejudice they have to deal with. But the thing I think I hold firm in terms of what I've done is that there are just so many, it's about there's no magic bullet, but for me it was education, self-education. And as an artist and as a writer and as a producer and a teller of stories, there's just so much to draw on, and not just in terms of what other black men and women have done before me or alongside me, but also from the wider culture. I think that's kind of a key thing. And the key thing is also to ask the question of oneself, which isn't so harsh, not to judge oneself so harshly, because in that way, other kind of possibilities and ways forward come into being. And that sounds kind of very woolly, but I do mean that in the sense that there are moments where you might think you didn't get a job, or you didn't get an interview, or you didn't succeed at a particular task, or you didn't get into a certain kind of door, or because you don't have the certain kind of skills, and that can be, you can get very defeated by that sort of thing. But I think to not judge oneself so harshly and to keep moving forward is a very important thing. More specifically, we could talk more specifically about ways and agencies and ways of doing that.
Right. I think just very quickly. Two things I think just in terms of how you do all this. One is about language and learning in terms of kind of just understanding how things fit together, kind of formal education-wise, but kind of informally actually understanding how power structures work and so on. Language, which is one of the keys to negotiating all of these kind of weird, kind of privileged spaces, is about how you use language and use it properly. But also, just as a final thing, I agree with something that Topher was saying, which is that we can't be too harsh on ourselves, in as much as, given the choice between being a black man and being white, it would be really boring being white. It would be really dull because we wouldn't have all of these things that we think about, partly in problematic terms, but also in terms of kind of heritage terms, in terms of actually being able to think about things and look at things from several different perspectives at once. I think things would be dull that way. I think it's much more interesting to be able to approach life in the ways that we're doing right now.
And with that thought, there were loads of other interesting questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Big up.
Okay. Can I thank them? Fantastic.